Our clerk is back.
Maybe.
Oh,
No, I'm here. Physically.
all right. You ready to get rolling?
I'm just, okay, it's all set now.
Okay.
Yes, we go for this.
We're recording. We're good. All right. We will move on to an exciting update to something that, as I mentioned earlier, we've been working on for a generation, which really is not an exaggeration because it's been my entire lifetime that we've been redoing downtown Ferndale, like in a good way, right? So it took planning and tax financing changes and all sorts of things to create what's there now, and now we're carrying it forward, and I think this is a really exciting conversation about what comes next. So
Yeah, so since the last time we've talked, we've made some edits, met with Barry a couple times, and the
great, okay.
appearance review committee last week with the attorney to talk through that side of things. So I'll mention that a little bit at the end. But I think based on the last time, we kind of talked about height a lot, and so we're coming back at you with a different approach to height, and I anticipate that's most of what we'll need to just iron out tonight. But I think we're getting really close to a draft, so I hope you all had a chance to look through everything. We still, I guess the hope is that if we can finalize some components tonight, to then work towards getting a draft to council and getting it adopted. Just to remind you, we haven't finalized the regulating plan sub-district stuff yet, but the intent is still to have what's in the draft are these two different districts that are a way of dividing things up in terms of intensity and height and uses a little bit and frontage types. So with the downtown core district, that's our big crossroads at Woodward and 9 Mile, thinking about all the buildings set up right to the front, mixed use, maybe a bit more height at the Woodward 9 Mile kind of intersection that could be incentivized through affordable housing, but also just really preserving what's there with not anything too tall, but we can get into that a little bit more. And then the urban flex district being a little bit more flexible in terms of allowing townhouse type buildings that could be live work buildings, have a little bit of a front yard setback, to have a stoop and feel a little bit more residential in nature as a transition into the neighborhoods. So that's all still the same, just kind of cleaned up from the last time we spoke. So when it comes to height, we had talked about minimums, maximums, like ad nauseum. And based on the last meeting where 100 feet was too tall, Justin and we went back and forth many times trying to nail down an option. And what's presented in here is Justin's gut at what the different heights in different parts of the downtown should be. And it's pretty similar to what your current ordinance is, with just a little increases here and there. And I think as we were talking through it and I'm looking at it all, it seemed still a little complicated and could potentially be even simpler. And so what I was doing this week was trying to map where these different things would be and looking at the existing. So this was a map that I prepared for Michelle a year ago or whenever. So your existing height is in the shades of orange on the lots of what the current maxes are. And it's a little hard to read, but there's not really an easy way to do it. I drew in blue frontage lines showing the kind of heights that are in the draft as you see it now. So 70 as a max, right, like I said, right along West 9 Mile there and West Troy, and extending just basically a block in on the east side as well. And then various gradations of 55, 60, 45, 55, sort of related to what you have now, but it still felt just too complicated to me. And just those 5-foot increments, you're not going to get another story. It seemed a little artificial, and so I tried to simplify it even further and say, could this be tied back to those sub-districts? So could the downtown core have a cap at 70 with some bonus maybe, again, that housing, affordable housing incentive along Woodward. And then maybe just capping the urban flex at 55, let's say. But it's just an approach at trying to make it simpler, but maybe you want that level of detail. And it's hard because there's existing buildings there, and what they are now versus what they could be in the future. So I guess some discussion on this would be helpful. And also more on the map in terms of we talked about extending it east to the railroad as well. Or do we just want to like go back and just amend just the CBD district? We talked a bit with the Appearance Review Committee about, are we just amending the CBD district? And I had said in past meetings that you could include some of these other little chunks here that say add to CBD. And looking at the greater Woodward with the TUD district, so they're like, which district are we talking about amending? So yeah, that's what I'm kind of looking for feedback on. I don't know if you guys have other specific things in looking at the most recent draft that you want to talk about, or if Justin wants to chime in on any of that. It could go 20 different ways with this height stuff, so I think we're getting closer to what it should be, but would love your thoughts on things.
Your comments on the choppy height are interesting because like the highest concentration of my little scrawled notes in here are like, why is this side of the street higher than that side of the street?
Yeah.
And why do we chop it up? So it's interesting that you kind of had the same,
because it kind of is that way.
gut
now.
reaction
Yeah.
of no, this side of the street shouldn't be 45 and this side shouldn't be 55. The whole thing should be, or some some things would be similar.
Well, it's this trying to step things down too, and it's hard to know that a 5 or 10, even 10-foot difference isn't that. 10 foot is a full story, but the transitioning, and do we want to, if we don't want a third district, let's say, having an added layer of height difference would be a way to transition things down, but I don't know that it's a meaningful enough difference. But yeah.
I don't know if we want to try and tackle the two questions separately. I think they kind of overlap and intersect, so maybe we'll just sort of jump in wherever we'd like to start. So the two questions have to do with the potential simplification of maximum heights and the question of whether to amend a district or create something new.
Yeah.
In terms of the internal process of whether to amend a district or create something new, I have very little opinion on that. I would look to the two of you for like, how do we do this?
So,
how do we do it the cleanest? How do we make the least number of things like stupid non-conforming, as opposed to like reasonable non-conforming? Like what's going to cause you the least pain on the back end would be kind of my first question. And is it that you keep CBD, do you overlay something, or do we just totally update it?
I don't know, Justin.
I think amending the CBD would be the
Is
least
cleanest.
amount of brain damage potentially. Yeah.
You could do it in like 2 phases. You could
Accomplish
amend
similar
the
things.
CBD district to be these 2 form-based sub-districts, and then at a later time extend that as like a rezoning down East 9 Mile or to these other couple little areas that to me sort of makes sense as part of the greater whole. You could just tackle those after the fact, like get the district in place, figure out if it's working or if things need to change, and say, to fully implement the master plan, we want to rezone, because rezonings are different than just amending the text.
Yeah, we saw that tonight.
Yeah. So in order to like get the text, because
Good
again,
thing for us to remember.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that.
that when you do just a text amendment, but of this scale, the noticing requirements from the state are very different than rezoning. And when you rezone something, you do have that number of how many number of parcels are affected in terms of you can rezone the whole thing and not the entire city and not notice anyone in the city per state law. So maybe that's flawed, but so you might want to just tackle that later. it's hard, like, especially this, like, Vester, that little chunk there that's MXD1. I don't know why. Is it not in the DDA? Is that why it wasn't included? It's usually we like to zone things the same on both sides of the street, and this is an example where it just seemed odd to me that it wasn't.
I think just with
That's a funny neighborhood.
it is,
Yeah.
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 I don't know, and I don't know if maybe it was at a time when they were trying to encourage a certain production use there, and maybe that wasn't permitted in the CBD. I don't know.
So actually, Valentine Vodka was one of our first projects that married what we just talked about in terms of
Yeah,
production,
industrial and retail.
production and retail, and our vehicle for getting that done at that time and trying something new was MXD. I think what we're seeing now with the conversation in M1 is that there are other vehicles to accomplish that. But to my recollection, that was one of the reasons that there was a conversation about MXD was that we had the VFW hall and we had the spot where Valentine is now, and we knew that they were destined to be redeveloped in non-traditional CBD ways. But we're neighboring higher
Yeah.
density residential, so what do we do with the apartment building? You know, that was kind of the question on the table.
So I
How do
think-
you not just rezone one parcel? but
Yeah,
what can you incorporate
absolutely.
the whole farm?
So it probably makes the most sense is to just amend the CBD district itself. Because we'd already talked about in the future looking at some of your other corridors, other business districts and mixed-use districts. And obviously that conversation is happening already with your M1 as well. So I think maybe just for now, just keep it, it sounds like that would probably be easiest is to just amend the CBD. But I think what's good in this exercise is to start thinking about we talked a lot last time about those transitions. And, you know, Withington especially is a very awkward transition, right? Like, those single-family homes are looking right onto a main, what could be, you know, traditional downtown development that, you know, like I said, usually we like to zone things the same thing on both sides of the street. But acknowledging that and saying, okay, we're going to continue to look at that and some of those transitional districts, rezoning even some of the residential too, to be a little more flexible in terms of your types of residential units in the future too. So maybe that's just part of the rezoning is a different conversation then. So when it comes to height, let's talk about what's in there now.
Did anyone else have a comment or a question on the question about rezoning versus text amendment when it comes to implementing these new suggested districts? No. Okay. Thank you.
So a lot of our struggle in the last month or so of redoing this was losing that building height incentive table because we really didn't have anything. We didn't want to go too tall. And so without having kind of that carrot saying, hey, we'll give you more height, we lost some of those incentives. And so we're trying to figure out how to build some of those in. So the one way to have some level of bonus height still allowed without going too tall was the idea of this 80-foot bonus. So you basically could get an extra floor if you incorporate a certain percentage of affordable units into your mixed-use development. But yeah, just along Woodward right now, it's written from Brackenridge to Saratoga. That could shrink. It could be longer. It could extend down 9 Mile. Just open for discussion, I guess, on that bonus height thing, but also what level of detail do we think is warranted in terms of maximum heights?
Please. Sorry, Commissioner
Chair.
Kelly, then Commissioner Garg. Sorry.
Yeah, through the chair, we originally had talked about 5 stories with a step back. Is that, I guess I'm not finding it in here, but.
So we talked about that a lot at the last one, and
I had the same question, actually. Is it your setbacks?
it
All right.
just
Yeah.
the whole resulting in awkward building shapes and lacking the ability to, use your parcel. We can we went back and forth on that a lot. We can add that back in if,
I
think it's
think
here.
it is on there, page 6, on setbacks halfway down.
Yeah, sorry, I was not finding it, but I was just reading through our,
I had the same question. And now
Conversation.
I see it was right in front of me. Before I wrote question about step back. No, wait, it's right there.
Yeah, it's housed under setback, but it's a step.
yeah, above the third story, you have a
Okay.
setback of 15. Thanks.
That's how I
So-
missed it.
It's still in there.
so that's required then. Above a third story, we would go 15 feet inward.
From the front.
Okay.
Okay. Not 15 feet all around, just 15 from the front? Because you're already in 20 from back. If you're adjacent to residential.
Right.
Yeah, we already have the residential setback.
And just one more point through the chair. I'm comfortable with the bonus floor on Woodward at this point, but I don't know that I would be comfortable with that outside of what you've noted, so I think that that's good.
Commissioner Goring?
Yeah, through the chair. Yes, first on that step back, or setback as it's written here, I do think that, like you're mentioning, it gets kind of to an awkward form where you have a building, all along the street there's a building just sitting on top of the other building of exactly the same kind of envelope. So I think that does limit creativity, flexibility, that sort of thing. I think the idea of it is kind of justified at some point. But the reality of what that, I don't think we'd necessarily get the kind of interesting types of buildings that maybe could be found otherwise. I don't know what the other solution would be if it's a percentage or whatever of
Yeah.
over a certain height. That would allow for more flexibility of what that form looks like. So that's kind of on that topic. And then as far as the max height conversation, I do think this is where it is right now, and even where it is existing in this alternative one is a little bit too cute in how we're trying to align the different heights. There's like, this side's 55, that side's 60, here we go, now we're at 70. Simplification would be great in my perspective. Even as it is right now, it's a little bit confusing how there's a higher height allowed next to an R2 than otherwise is allowed next to an R3 in some locations, kind of south of 9 Mile versus north of 9 Mile. So some of those heights are already a little bit kind of funky in how they're allowed. So overall simplification, and then kind of a real clarity of when there is a change, why that change is happening. I don't know if that's that step back, setback, whatever. Instead of having it specified by street frontage, if it's more determined by the surrounding use or something like that, or surrounding, like if it's R3 versus R2, if that's the way where you can kind of control those heights a little bit more fine-tuned, or if it's just kind of go a little bit more broad and not get too worried about that, I guess. I don't know if that makes fully clear, but I mean, you have 45 or 40, I can't quite read it, along with, is it Withington? And then on the south there, you have some 70 right adjacent to an R2, or just backing up to an R2.
So that's where that 20-foot setback would come in to
Mhm.
buffer along that
20-foot step back or setback?
setback, rear yard setback.
Yeah.
Adjacent to a residential district, so that 70-foot, and the step back you're talking about is just in the front yard.
Mhm.
It was that was the desire, I think, of the commission, to have it feel like not imposing buildings on the street. I don't think a 5-foot, personally, I don't think a 5-story building is that imposing, but so it's like two separate things. It's the buffering to the residential, and then that kind of street feel along the street.
So I guess just to clarify, for me, simplified heights that are more uniform, maybe you have two different versions instead of however many are on here, and then tying those heights more clearly to a justification.
Any thought on what those heights should be? Is 70 in some areas with a 10-foot bonus good? Too tall? Not tall enough? Any thoughts on sort of we've got now a couple of benchmarks out there for what about 55 looks like. Some other communities have benchmarks for like what sort of 70 to 80 looks like.
The earlier, it's the Ferndale House. What did you say that was?
It's 55, right?
55.
At Ferndale House?
I think 50. The ordinance allows for the stairwells to be
Right.
with an extra 15. So then the stairwells are 65, I guess, and then the regular building is 50.
So an earlier slide, I think it showed, did you have like 65 feet? What was that slide? Or was it 55 feet, I believe?
I think in my version I proposed 65 all the way to Livernois, from Planavon to Livernois.
Yeah.
And then option 2 was 55 from Planavon to Livernois.
I didn't think that there was enough of a difference between 65 and 70. That's why I put it, and since it's existing as 50, that's why I showed it as 55. But
And that was, through the chair, brought up at the last conversation as well. You know, reading through the minutes, it was discussed, you know, why not just go to 70? So
yeah,
I've had the interesting opportunity the last couple of days driving in a totally different direction for work to pass through the intersection of Maple and Woodward a couple times. And I was really confused by, like, I felt like I kind of like the height of that building that I see on the southwest corner of Maple and Woodward, but I can't get a handle on how big it is. And I figured out why. And I just wanted to share it with you guys from their ordinance, that they have both height limits and story limits. So the reason I couldn't get a sense of like how big it was is because it's only 5 stories, but it's like 80 feet tall. Because they max you out at 5 stories, and your 5th story has to be set back. They want your eave line to be no taller than 58 feet. The ridge of your sloped roof can't be any taller than 70, and then you can have mechanical that goes up to 80. So it was just a really interesting, they made a decision that they wanted it to look a certain way, you know, not like a typical 8-story 8 windows. I have no particular opinion on that. It was just a moment of that building feels like it's the right size, but I can't tell how big it is. So to have it reinforced, when I looked at it today, that like, oh, that's like a 70-story. That's a 70-foot building. That's what a 70-foot building looks like on Woodward, where it is a little bit wider. Made me more comfortable with 70 feet, because I'd been kind of like, I don't know, maybe it should be 55 and you get a bonus if you go to 70.
we can add in the story thing. I think we had that in a previous version. That's how I'm writing several other ones right now, to add maximum height and maximum stories would be a way to do that.
I don't know enough about why you'd want to put in maximum stories to have an opinion on that. I don't know why they chose to.
So you're not cramming in like the smallest possible floors. It's a,
But we want to encourage density. Like, why would we not want to?
because it looks bad at the end of the day. What you're feeling is the scale is appropriate, and so if you have too small floors, it can look like a layered cake, and that's why we tend to not want it.
Not an architect. So I guess it was just the 70 now. I feel more comfortable with 70 because we didn't have a Ferndale example of what that looked or felt like. If we were going to talk about 80, I thought it was interesting that their 80 is where they top out their equipment.
well,
And is our 80 another? Do we keep it at the same setback that you went in at 3? Does it need to get smaller again at some point if it's going to continue to go up, without making it look like an unusable New York skyscraper? Just a question.
Through the chair, if I could, I personally would not be in favor of an additional setback on top of what we already have. I think if we're already talking about buildings having sort of a funny shape the further up you get, I think that now we're going to have a really tiered cake sort of look as you go up, and it's, I mean, just kind of, yeah, right.
Yep.
We're going to have some really awkward buildings on our hands.
But you were, just for clarification, the 15-foot after above the third story is your opinion on that?
Personally, no. I would I agree with your previous point that I think it starts to limit flexibility and start to create sort of a weird typography within the downtown if every building has that same setback. So I would be against that personally. But if it's, the feeling of this board that if everyone else is in agreement, I mean, it is what it is. I think the height is what's going to add density. So I'm happy with the 70 feet. If I had my druthers, I would not have that setback, but I'm open to the opinions of the board commission.
Other thoughts on setbacks? It is above the third story, not above a certain height. So however you deem your stories to be. Although we do have a minimum for the first floor. Don't we? 14? I think we have a minimum height for the first floor. Yeah, ground floor door height, minimum 14. I thought we did. The things I remember versus the things I forget, I don't know why.
So you could have 3 20-foot stories on top of each other. You're good to go.
Isn't that what they just built?
Pretty much, yeah.
Isn't that what we're
Yeah.
looking at?
Pretty similar.
Yeah.
It's a very expensive building, by the way.
No joke. I have no illusions. It was just when I realized that was the
They're not
size,
going to build like a barracks.
and it didn't look like it was 7 stories. It was just sort of like aha.
And I think if I can interject, just one thing to consider maybe is that since we are requiring on the primary frontage 80%, that's ground floor, isn't it? Administration. Never mind.
Delete.
Never mind.
We can add,
I had a question about the build to, in terms of I know maybe this goes to the setback conversation or not, in terms of accessibility around the building, or why would we not have 100% primary frontage built to? Why would we have 80?
because of opportunities for courtyards, for recessed entries, for alleyways, for interesting moments. Most people will build all the way to that. It's more of an exception than it's allowing for creativity for that sort of thing.
If something is over a certain size, should we require some of those interesting moments, or do we?
I don't think you need to.
See what our proposal across the street was from Wolf River initially? I think we need to.
That was allowed through a variance through the chair. I mean, that 150-foot limit
Right.
should theoretically allow for that.
And there's even a smaller one in here too.
Well, and we have breaking it up into
There's a
like
60, right?
the 60 foot bays too, which will force them to think creatively about.
Where is that?
That is
Urban Flex.
under
60s?
the general standards.
Right? Oh, I'm sorry. No, wait, I'm looking at the wrong thing.
Articulation, page 11. No individual component, a bay basically, shall
Yes,
have a
right.
length of more than 60 feet.
Because I thought of Wolf River
Right,
again.
right.
And I was like, would that have been?
So this is where we're saying recesses and stuff.
So it feels like that's baked into this already.
Yeah.
So I think
That's
we
why
don't
it's
need to add it. It seems like we
eight.
don't need to add another requirement.
Part of the reason I asked, and it was like a teeny tiny part of a conversation with Aaron this morning, was one of the reasons that Withington West, which is behind Ferndale House, I think, my perception, that one of the reasons it doesn't feel as big and imposing is because it's got these beautiful giant mature trees all around it that give it some scale and proportion. It's next to the single family homes on the other side of the street. is that something that we should be thoughtful about allowing for if we're going to build more things that are 55 and 70 feet? And maybe not on the corner of 9 and Woodward, but does Urban Flex allow?
Yeah, it does. So that has the flexible front yard.
Yeah.
For that very reason.
So that's part of the intent in an Urban Flex where you're still building to 55 is that you've got more green space to go out or up.
And that kind of leads me to another thing that I added this draft, which was some streetscape guidelines requirements. So we had talked a little bit about that and open space type stuff. So I added in some basic streetscapes elements so that when people are putting that in as part of their project, it would be consistent and clear where you want bike parking, stuff like that, and trees and furniture, and following the DDA specifications. But then also on open space on the last page here, so we could add a minimum private open area. I have that in a couple other codes I'm working on where it would require 10 to 15% is kind of typical of the way it's written right now. It would have to be like interior to the building, so requiring like air shafts like they did in the tenements, but in a much more beautiful way, like courtyard spaces, balcony spaces. You could meet it through the step back, 15-foot step back above the third story, or on the rear of buildings, they, outdoor patio kind of space. Or it could be met, we could revise it that it could be met by that front yard, dooryard in the Urban Flex district to just require some breathability kind of embedded into new development.
Would a rooftop patio meet it? Because everyone would just do that.
Yeah, it would.
Change the footprint.
Yep.
Thoughts on private open space? It's a term I'm not familiar with in terms of pros and cons. Or do we suggest it or require it?
Unless we start converting like public parking into parks, which is not a bad idea, but we might want to include it or require it just because there is limited opportunity to add more green spaces downtown, and so it might allow for that.
Is it green or open?
Well,
Open,
that was my question.
I should say open. More open space for people to get out of their unit or whatnot. But
Yeah, they have an entire downtown. I don't know, like I could see a permeability conversation, but I don't get the private open space conversation. When you're in a downtown. I don't get it. Maybe it's just because it's 9 o'clock at night, but I'm
It's more about like how people are going to interact with the space or perceive the space, because even when you're walking in an area that, if you go through a city or whatever, like you can find these little spaces of like reprieve where it's like it feels good, and us as humans, we like to see a lot of things. That's why we plant grass in our front yards. So I think it's more of just like a design thing from like the person experience to like see something that's different and breaks up the space.
Do we want to legislate that?
If we want it, then,
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
you know.
Yeah.
Do you want balconies? Do you want rooftop gardens? Do you want courtyards, internal courtyards, alleys, like not alleys, but like in between building moments? That's
If
what it would-
we define open space as these items. I mean, that might help me, I guess.
Yes, I can clarify that.
Right, because you just said balconies, for example. And
Yeah.
I mean, that was not.
So
occurring
look
to
at
me.
the language here on the last page. It talks about requiring a private open area that you can, in your downtown, 100% of that can be satisfied through balconies or decks.
Yep.
So I will clarify I just didn't want to put too much effort into it without gauging your thoughts on it. But we can either add a definition or I'll just clarify this.
I like the idea of integrating it, but I think if we're talking about, it sounds as though it could be green space, or it could be a balcony, it could be all of these things, and I would want to know what it all could be.
But as it's written here, it does actually not allow for it to be up by the street. So if you're walking
Yeah.
down the street, you wouldn't be able to have a little courtyard nook that's publicly open, as it is. So that's just one thing for as far as conversation goes, if that's what somebody's wanting to get towards. I think that does get a little tricky too, as far as privately owned public open space, as far as liabilities, and
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of hesitations there. So
There's kind of two things. It's like
Mhm.
the dooryard idea in the urban flex that is that kind of front yard, like extended, it could be extended pedestrian space. And then this is more of like the integration into the building itself, so that you don't just have giant cubes going up, I guess. This is to promote that creativity, however, whether it's not necessarily intended to be public, but on private property, but breathable permeability.
and through the chair, I think I like that concept a lot more than a mandated 15 feet over your third story. This almost gets towards that same outcome, because you're saying it has to be on there somewhere.
But
I
let's
don't know.
choose.
I don't know if that's really how that functions or not, but
That's the intent of this
Mhm.
in other ordinances I've written.
And there's already some restrictions as to how your balconies can interact with the streetscape, so people can't just like stick a bunch of balconies on, and then you've got a restriction here that, only a certain percentage is going to be a balcony. So it needs to force some creativity, not just a box with balconies.
Yeah.
but as it's written, it could be all in the back, I guess. So that wouldn't change the streetscape. You wouldn't see as much variety or variation there necessarily.
One of the ways we're trying to improve our streetscape too, though, is through our vegetation ordinance and some landscape ordinance. So I know that's not exactly related to the form-based code per se, but to just kind of improve the overall user experience to have those updates. Just as like a FYI.
Broader than just the downtown, or just the downtown?
Yeah.
Broader than just the downtown, but yeah, for all needs.
That's actually a clarification I had on the streetscape element. It's talking about the street trees section in section 24-191. Is there a street tree list? Because I didn't find it.
It's the draft that Aaron's
Okay.
working on.
Okay, I was about to say, I'm like, this does not exist.
There are street trees that are technically listed in our ordinance, but it's just not up to date.
Yeah. And I'd once again recommend to have that list outside the ordinance in case you need to update it.
Absolutely.
So maybe just refer to the tree list, house it on wherever it's located, so you don't have to always keep it updating the ordinance.
I think that for like a little sidebar comment on that, we're looking at more of doing like what is not permitted versus what's permitted. So invasive species being the focus of like, these are the species that are not allowed because they're invasive versus having like, can only have ginkgos.
Norway maples.
You know what I mean?
And did you say, did someone say earlier that there'd already been an update to a conversation, again in lines of coordinating with what the DDA's already got and what the city wants, to the conversation about street furniture? And that if people are going to have street furniture, it has to be what the DDA wants?
That's
Did I hear
what
that?
I wrote in here, but
That's what I wrote too.
so it says things like we can
Oh,
make
really? That's what this says? Oh, I didn't read it this way.
well, maybe under lighting it does. We can add it under street furniture as
Yeah,
well.
that was my question for street furniture, was if they're going to integrate their street furniture into the downtown, buy the same street furniture the DDA has. And
Yeah,
integrate it into
I
the
mentioned the
downtown. For-
DDA.
Really specifically because you refer to things that the DDA already buys. Benches, trash receptacles, bike racks. And then I wondered, sorry to jump around in streetscape, about bicycle facilities and in terms of things being permitted in the right of way. Are there any restrictions on size and how much sidewalk they can cover? Some of our sidewalks are getting darn tight with all of our street furniture.
For accessibility.
For
Right, but I'm saying like a
wheelchair.
a mandatory for ADA.
Yeah.
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 We could add something in here that all of this stuff needs to be included like in an amenity zone, which would require it be curb,
Clear space.
and so that you preserve the clear space next to the building. I just did a disability advocacy section at MSU, and it was a bunch of blind folks, and it's just you don't realize how much that stuff is not navigable
Yep.
for them or people in wheelchairs. So I can add, we have amenity zone language I can add in there so that all of this stuff is in a certain area.
I like that.
That's really exciting. That's I think that would be hugely helpful to us and to the DDA.
Like
Yeah.
if you're going to put stuff out there, it has to go in that. And I don't know, what is your current outdoor seating standards? Is that in the ordinance right now?
It's in the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Is it in zoning or is it outside of zoning?
It might be just licensing.
Yeah, like permitting.
Don't add more stuff near the sidewalk cafe. Because we have to beat them up.
Just be more to choose.
Any
If
other?
only we could ticket them.
Yeah, right. Any other questions or comments on open space and streetscape? For either the flex zone or what was the other one called? Urban core. Thank you.
I'd be curious to hear, since there was some conversation on that above the third story, 15-foot setback for the front yard, what you guys, a little more consensus on that would be helpful, whether you want to keep it or not.
Do we want to swap it for open space? Is that sort of the question?
Yeah, I mean, I think the private open area could be revised to not, that we could allow it in that front 30 feet as long as the build to is met in whatever district you're in, but that some of that could be in the front. I think that would alleviate what you were talking about in terms of allowing some of those balcony outdoor spaces to happen on the front of the building would count, and then you might not need the required 15-foot step back.
But that would be an option.
I guess
We
it
did
says
not
right
have-
right now it says at grade it should not be located. So above grade it can already be, yeah. So
Deb and Krista, we've had step backs for a while. We're just beginning to see them implemented. Any thoughts on keeping step backs or not? Not really. I mean, we're really just beginning to see them
actually getting built.
actualized. Yeah.
Another option would be to require them in the flex but not in the core,
in the flex, but not in the what?
in the downtown core.
Oh,
My understanding is the concern is didn't want like a canyon, right? Is that
Right. Yes.
so? It's not necessarily the only option, but just kind of like that's the fear, right?
Yeah.
Especially
Okay.
if
Just
we've
wanted
got
to make sure I understood.
Especially if we've got 70 on 9 Mile, which some of those iterations had quite tall on 9 Mile. Yeah, like that.
Because yeah, it's already allowed,
With
but with
Setbacks.
with setbacks, yeah.
So, I don't know if it's going to make sense at this point of the uni. So, for me, the step back in the building, talking as the height goes up, is that the taller buildings next to residential, depending on where you're at, you're potentially casting shadows on, or shrouding in darkness the residents who are adjacent. So, is there another method to approach that?
Yes. So how it's written right now is a rear yard when you are adjacent to residential has to be set back 20 feet. This setback is for the front yard to exactly as described to prevent the fear of cavernous, tall buildings enclosing the street. So they're kind of two separate issues. So right now we've built in a 20-foot rear yard setback adjacent to residential for the shadow.
Yeah, so I
reason.
guess for me, it's not so much that the building has to step back after a certain height to a certain, it's more the perception of that building height and the potential for shadowing to the adjacent neighbors.
And so, through the chair, so we have that, and I think I'm definitely in support of the step back adjacent to residential. But facing the street, I mean,
Yes, that's what
if we can do something else where it doesn't create that situation you fear, and maybe that's done with some of the open space, playing with the open space, I would be supportive of that.
And just to make clear, I'm totally in support also of the setback at the residential adjacencies. That makes sense to me in a lot of ways, but it's the street side that I kind of take issue with.
Even
Yeah.
on spots like Withington where you've got single-family residential across the street.
Through the chair, I think it's dealt with by having a 55-foot height limit there. So it's already kind of built into it.
And potentially a dooryard.
If they built townhouses, if they built a mixed-use kind of building, it could,
I know I was kind of all over the place when I first talked about the height.
Yeah.
But I really like the alternate, the alternative two. It's much clearer, much simpler. Although I don't like that there's an additional 45-foot. I think
I
if we're
wasn't
doing
sure
it,
what to do with that.
I mean,
and
I don't
think
know, because
Justin
those are the
was-
areas you're talking about would have to be
The green area.
rezoned anyway.
Yeah,
So,
so
it's
I
kind
think
of
it's
like, what do you do there?
outside.
But I think that's it's once again adding up. But here's another little situation. I think we need to be a little bit more simple as far as that goes, but maybe not.
And it all stems from an Excel sheet. So that's why I think when we were looking at the Excel sheet, being like, well, let's move this one up 5.
Yeah.
But then when you put it on paper, I'm like, okay, this seems too complicated.
Is that, it's R3 around there. So the R3 can go up to 45 feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, this map. Yep.
Yeah.
So it would
On its
just
own
be
right now.
the south side of Vester could be 55 then
Yeah.
across the street from 45, but
I think I'd want to keep that. I think it works as a transition, but
At least the mixed use.
no, I mean just the.
The
I don't know if the 55 to the 45 just on that street. I don't know.
yeah, I think that works fine
Okay.
there because it's a different district.
So you're saying
not like
keeping it at 45? Is that
The north side
the north side?
The north side we're not looking at touching anyway.
Okay, if it wasn't rezoned.
If it wasn't,
To be, okay.
yeah. So it would
Yep.
remain at 45, and the south side would be we could change to be 55.
Unless it got rezoned to be CBD, at which point we would need to choose, do we want
Yeah.
it to be core or flex?
I don't
Yep.
think we were ever talking about rezoning that
Oh,
the south side of Vester as being CBD.
That little pocket on the
It
north
already
side
is.
is all I was talking about.
It's not, the north part.
Yeah.
That little purple.
The little
Sorry,
purple.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the next street. I apologize. I was looking at Breckenridge. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Disregard.
Yeah, I just think about those parking lots, including one that's privately owned. And if there's a rezoning request, is there a reason to not have it be at a minimum CBD urban flex, right?
Yeah.
Given what's around it. Yeah, it's fronting urban flex or urban core.
I was just going to say, so those two little pieces are like, do we rezone these to CBD? The Withington site, am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That one, as far as getting the heights different? Is that R4?
It's
Okay.
R4 right
So that
now
one's
because that's
60
the
feet
tall,
is what is permitted, okay. So
and it's allowed at 60 right now. So if we changed it to be,
55.
but we're not talking about rezoning it anyway.
Right.
So
I just was
disregard
wondering how
that.
that fits in, those two items.
So it would just be the area to the
Yep.
west. Is that part of CBD? Yeah. So it would be 55 here. We're leaving this alone, which is already at 60,
Yep.
and back to 55 here. So just letting this be an anomaly, I think, is what I'm hearing.
And then the other side, it's 55 on the south,
Yeah.
45 on the north, on Vester.
Yeah, so
Okay.
this would be 55, this would be 45, and leaving this alone, not rezoning that. If you're comfortable with the 55, 70. I think it just simplifies things.
So keeping the R4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I wouldn't be surprised to see a rezoning request from that, and maybe we want that for leverage purposes. But
Do we anticipate them changing in the future?
I anticipate them changing their mind every day. So maybe not.
South side or north side? I'm sorry. I got a little lost.
This thing.
Those three parcels.
Oh, that one. Oh, I
Yes.
thought we were still talking about Vester.
Yeah.
Never mind. Gaping hole. Ay, 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 ay.
So essentially, we're looking at alternate 2 with the 45s being changed to 55s. And
55 here. I'll just remove this one.
South side.
just on the south side, and
Yep.
then that piece right there staying at 60.
Yeah. So I think it'll be embedded into the district then. So if you're looking at this draft of the dark blue versus, it's kind of almost purple on there, versus the light blue. So the dark blue would be 70. The light blue would be 55. Well, no, I guess not. So Troy, right now, is 70. But I have it shown here as being urban flex as a step back.
Shows it down.
But we have
So let's
the
talk about
parking
that.
deck.
Yeah.
It's not the whole block.
And that's
So we
tall,
downzone that
right?
block.
So do we need to show Troy as the dark blue? Probably.
I think we do.
I would think
Yeah.
so.
Okay. Then the height. Then I'll just draw a line where the we'll keep it in the text, but also a line where the 80 bonus for if you provide affordable housing, you get an extra bonus on Woodward. I think that'll be clearer that the height is then determined by the district. Helps define those better.
Well, it does beg the question, like, why can we go to 70 on Troy versus East 9 Mile further east? Because those are R3 butting the CBD versus R2 to the west of Woodward.
Mm-hmm.
Not to make it more complex or challenging, it's just I'm
You could-
trying to think of why.
Yeah.
What's the difference here?
And with East Troy, with East 9 Mile, you have East Troy behind it, which is wider than an alley.
I guess those have
You
the
see-
rear. Those are the rear portion of the property there, and then on Troy, how is that handled? Is that handled as a rear setback of 20 feet as well for the CDB?
It would be here. It would be the 20 feet.
And the
Yeah,
outside.
but then on the east side of, there,
No, that would be a front yard.
that would have two front yards,
Mm-hmm.
9 Mile and Troy.
Yeah, because
So
it's a
that's the
through lot.
difference. So that's why a lower height there
Mm-hmm.
is. Okay.
We could extend this further down. Would be one option is to extend the urban core farther to the east. I think I was looking at this saying I can see townhouses going on some of these like allowing that originally, but that might make sense to if you further extend it this way for that urban flex.
Well, I'm not necessarily proposing that.
No, but I
as
think
part
that's a
of it.
good conversation.
Just trying to wonder why the height difference on Troy west of Woodward versus east, because of how those are relating to the residential around it. When to the east it's R3, to the west it's R2.
That was another whole markup of this map that I had was why is this all R2 and not R3,
I think,
which might be a conversation for another
yeah,
day.
probably another day. My guess was probably that it was to protect some of those older,
Yeah.
bigger single-family homes, and now it wouldn't matter because single-family is permitted in R3. But
In terms of East 9 Mile, I think about the conversation that we had with Wolf River about shadows and setbacks and is the, so we've now built in a 20-foot
20-foot like along here.
along the alley. They probably got more than 20 feet because of how they positioned the parking, but it was a similar, they could still potentially get more than 20 feet. I'm just asking myself what's different. What's different about these two, about a CBD versus a CBD R3 when it comes to the composition of the block, and to have urban general 70-foot on East 9 Mile, how is it impacting the back neighbors in a way that it's not when you're backing up to, but you're backing up now to 55. So, and C3 is what, 45? 55.
Yeah, it's 55 right
Interesting. So really, you've got the potential for East to look the same as it does right now.
You mean extend the downtown core to this point?
Or further,
Or
toward
further.
Caxton, yeah.
This point?
And what's the impact to the folks along Vester as opposed to the folks along Withington? Because on Withington, you've got, your potential to go up higher.
Right.
Right. You know how many backyards where the parking lot is on Withington? You've got backyards on Vester.
Could you go back to the zoning map, please? Well, I guess the justification for you being able to build taller here is that you have another CBD building right
Right.
behind you,
Right.
whereas here you don't.
Right.
So you can't build as tall because the sun's coming from the south. So here it doesn't matter as much because you just have you have the potential for another tall building here
Right.
where you don't there.
But what's your max height in R3?
45.
45.
yeah,
It's only 10 feet shorter than what you'd potentially build on the Withington parking lot at 55 in urban flex. So right now there are short buildings there, but even under the current ordinance, they could be taller.
Right.
Right. To maybe not have a knot in my stomach, I like having it shorter down the side of 9 Mile where there's neighbors behind it currently. But we've already designed it so that that neighborhood can go taller. And there are a couple, like 3-story apartment buildings there already. I offered no resolution, sorry. I offered no closure to your opening salvo. There's a question, was there not, about whether office should be considered for active first floor?
Yes.
So my question actually relates to Krista and Deb's old office, and active streetscape. And if I don't think we currently prohibit office on the first floor of the DDA, do we?
No.
No. So if, like, in your old space on Cass, I like it. I love the way that they redid that building, but there are days when you walk by and all the blinds are pulled because of the way that the sun shines in the building, and there's people sitting there. Thoughts on whether that's just the general function of a building that has people in it, or whether office should be part of an active first floor?
Royal Oak has examples of that. So I'm thinking of Washington, there's like real estate offices and mostly real estate offices that I'm
And
thinking
IT firms in the first floor of the
Yeah,
building
IT
I used to be
firms.
in.
Even banks, you know, kind of have an office function. I mean, some part of them is, and it's not that attractive. I mean, you see the activity. I don't know if it's something that would draw you in or show that there's something happening. So I don't generally love it.
If it changes your mind, the future plan is retail for that space.
I think I need
It's
that.
not intended to be office.
Probably from a market value.
Yeah.
I think I do that. But do we dislike it enough that we would want to prohibit it in our downtown as have office on the first floor? As an active permitted use?
I don't know that we have to prohibit it.
So if someone wanted to do a Fernell house and they wanted to step in their parking by 30 feet and activate their streets front by 30 feet and they want to do it with office, we would permit that.
I frankly don't see office as an active use, because you would never walk down the street and then want to go into someone's architecture. Maybe because you want to build a house, but generally the general population isn't going to go into that office use, so it's not an active use for the general populace.
Do you
Unless
want to
it's like
prohibit it though, or do you think that the nature of what is needed to be built will take care of that? Market drop. Sorry, I have no vocabulary left now at this point. So
I don't know about prohibiting it. I mean, I would ideally prefer if it weren't. I would prefer services.
I want there to still be a balance for things like,
Right.
sorry, parking system, right? Like, if
But like-
everything's a restaurant.
But like a bank is not office to me. A bank is a service.
Yeah.
And I think we call out bank in our use chart.
Yeah,
It's
usually a separate thing.
Separate, so
So that type of business where you could get somebody walking in off of the street to, take advantage of the service provided there would be different to me than like a private firm office. If we differentiated that, but I don't know if we need to prohibit.
we'll
Anyway.
see a new example soon in the 413 West 9 Mile, the angled roof building. There's a real estate office that will be on the ground floor of that.
Yeah.
That building has a lot of windows, more than some of our older buildings. But so I don't really think it's active, but I think it's tough to prohibit just because we just don't have much office space right now.
I feel like that's where our hang-up is.
I know.
Is that we're trying to promote more office
Yeah.
space, so we're trying to get it wherever we can.
Right.
But it's not. I don't think it's necessarily the right place for it. So
Yeah.
I understand the conundrum.
but there's like, sorry, go ahead.
Kind of.
Yeah, I was going to say, what if we looked at, if we did want to deter it from anywhere, what if we looked at promoting it and encouraging it in the urban flex, but maybe not in the urban general or the urban core? Going forward, anyway. Maybe because that angled building is right at the corner of Planavon, right?
Right.
So that's technically right on that edge of urban flex anyway, so we wouldn't be that would fit.
And that's the one that we pushed to be a non-restaurant activation.
Right.
And they got an office.
Same for Ferndale House adjacent to Schiffer Park. That
Right.
space will it was approved for office, I think, and maybe retail, but I think it will end up as office, and it's kind of tucked away behind the park. It's in, I guess it's kind of in that flex area, yeah. It would count.
That Sumozu space, do you consider that office?
Yes.
That's right, that's on a main, I mean, that's,
It's funny that you say that, just like you're like the ultimate goal is retail, same there, they just needed
So,
a
yeah.
tenant to make the
because
deal happen.
I'm trying
right?
to I'm trying to think of an example of a use that works. I think outright prohibiting it might not work, but it's market, right? I mean, I think that even if it is office at one point, if the market's pushing it toward being retail or being something else, it goes there.
And, I mean, using Royal Oak as the example again, you don't see offices on Main Street, you see them on Washington.
Yeah.
It's that where the square footage is the most expensive is where the demand is, which is where you want the retail to go anyway.
Yeah. That your rent is going to
Dictate that, yeah.
Yeah.
So urban flex instead of urban general would be okay, and market would determine if that really was sustained, right?
I think we only have the requirement for the active street level uses in the downtown core, not in the flex. Yeah, because it's for that very reason. Is what you're talking about, is having an active retail environment.
So we're only talking about the downtown core right now
Yep.
anyway. But because we have the minimum 14-foot floor to floor on the first floor, I mean, theoretically, that space is already designed for retail.
Exactly.
So we won't run into an issue where a space is designed for office space and then can't be used for retail in the future. So I guess by that logic, then I'm, okay with that, and we'll let the market drive the design.
Like if the builder is using that space as office space until they
Get the rents they want.
Yeah, like that. I don't want to prohibit.
Yeah.
You'd rather see an office than it be vacant.
Yeah.
Through the chair, that's exactly my concern. It's like we're limiting our use. I think we're talking more about the form, and we're letting the function
Yeah.
follow that. And that's kind of the whole idea with this. And I would hate to prohibit something like that.
Old habits. But the goal of having this little line item in here is to not have parking in that first. That's what we're really trying to.
Yeah.
Right, and at the end of the day, I think if it's not parking, then it's a win. So
Yep.
I'd rather be, retail, office, and then parking
Way low.
down here.
I think this does that. I think I have the direction I need to make clarifications. I don't know, Justin, if there's anything else.
Are we solid on height? Or solid as we're going to be, maybe?
I think so.
I think alternative 2 with that slight adjustment on Dresser
Yeah.
seemed to be.
Did we come to a consensus on West Troy then? Or we're okay with that being changed to core, downtown core?
Yeah.
I mean, that's my hesitation, is both the West Troy and then that little piece of West 9 Mile between, what is it?
Planavon and
Like
Allen.
Allen, because that's R2, but I think the rear property line is kind of addressing that, and that's how it's different than some of those other locations. So I see that justification. And as you said, the houses are to the south, so it's not blocking the sun.
That's what I was going to say. So at least you have that kind of. They're not living in shadow either.
Yep.
Great. I didn't know if we would ever get to this point, and we did. Yay! So I just wanted to briefly kind of summarize what we talked about last week with the Appearance Review Committee. And my concern in this, and I think I mentioned it at the last meeting, was that it seemed like you had too many layers of review. and that the intent of a form-based code is that your vision and process is baked into the code and you don't need that extra review body. And we got some clarification from the attorney that when it was written in 2000, it was kind of a stopgap to, and so I think we're all comfortable, they were all comfortable at that meeting of making sure that whatever architectural guidelines that are in that separate ordinance now are incorporated into your existing architectural requirements section. So
That's
they're
the
not.
DDA design guidelines.
They have it reads like a form-based code already.
Yeah.
And that section of your ordinance already reads like a form-based code. So it would just be making sure that they're included in there. And then instead of having the requirement that you meet with the review committee, that it would just, we're looking at changing the site plan review language to require a pre-application meeting and the preliminary plan, just to make sure they're.
Just
So
a quick
be-
clarification. Does any of this fall outside of the DDA? Any parcel?
So the challenge is,
Question.
the challenge is that the DDA extends beyond the CBD. So we might have to require this pre-app for things, what did we say, in the CBD and in the transit, the TOD district, to capture everything that right now is being caught by the DDA.
Oh, yeah, particularly up and down Woodward, right?
Yeah. So it would just be, and I think the RRC would, I forwarded this to Christopher and he agreed that making it, not an approval, but part of as a conceptual review process is encouraged through the program. So they would be happy to see that as part of the process rather than another thing that you have to get approval for. So.
Just to clarify once again, the DDA extends beyond
The CBD
this,
district.
yes, but are there some portions of this that we've been talking about that could be falling outside of the DDA in any location?
I don't think so.
The TOD goes beyond the DDA, but
The CBD.
But we're talking about a DDA committee, review committee?
Yeah, we are.
So then doesn't it have to be within?
Bester is
Yeah.
outside the DDA.
so I guess for example,
So
For
we'd
them
be
to
adding
review
new
it.
design guidelines.
south of St. James, essentially on Woodward, is where I think the DDA kind of ends around there.
Okay.
So south of Woodward would be the TOD, which is outside of the DDA.
But even within this map, there's things that are outside of the DDA's design purview. Isn't Bester? Or no?
Best, yeah. The boundary I have includes, it's almost, yeah. But I could be,
No, I think that's right.
That's good.
The back half of Withington too? The back half of Ferndale, is that Ferndale Foods?
I think that that is part of the DDA, but the R4 zone properties are not part of the DDA. It kind of goes through where the alley was, goes towards the funeral home and Ferndale House. So since Ferndale House Ferndale Foods and the funeral home face 9 Mile, they still would be part of the pre-app, right? Yeah. Is that what you're asking?
So there's not a world in which Ferndale Foods would get subdivided and you'd have something developed facing 9 Mile and something developed facing Withington?
Well, I think the parcel would still be zoned.
The whole parcel.
Or the whole parcel would still be DDA, right? So it would still be part of the pre-app approval. Yeah.
basically we're making it so there are fewer places you have to look in the ordinance to understand.
Yeah.
Like right now, there are 3 different places, and we're getting it down to 2. So baby steps. But I think the reason we wanted to keep the architectural guidelines in that section 184 is because we want those to continue to apply to all of your buildings that are commercial or mixed use. And again, setting you up for future district amendments to keep them there rather than pull them into the downtown code.
Thank you.
Yeah, consensus.
Thank you. Alrighty. We will move to administrative items. We have in front of us the 2017 Planning Commission Year in Review draft. Would Sarah, you want to walk us through and then give us a deadline to get you some additions?
Yeah. So obviously didn't expect you all to read the annual report at this moment. And we weren't planning on presenting the whole thing just because we kind of figured tonight would be a long discussion. But essentially as part of our continued RRC certification, we are now going to do these every year, which I think is we should be doing these anyway. So generally, what we will do with this is we want to give folks a little bit more time if they wanted to add their trainings and things like that, or master plan goals for the coming year. And we will add executive summary as well. But essentially, this is what we did in 2017. Also included the BZA's agenda items that they went through. They had 3 variances throughout the year. But from the Planning Commission's perspective, we did 4 public hearings for ordinance amendments, which some of those had multiple amendments in them, so I didn't go through and count each of those, but they're detailed in here. We had 17 approved site plans, which is more than I thought, but we did.
I felt like there were more than that.
Some of those had multiple meetings. I didn't go into all that, but
Good point.
but we did have 22 discussion items, which I think helped kind of alleviate having revised site plans come back. We only had a couple of those, and some of those were the more complicated PUDs. So I think that's okay. This did spur a conversation as we're updating the fee schedule, though, and I think we are going to just charge a nominal fee for the discussion items. We do, put in a decent amount of work with them, even though I think we've gotten to a point now where tonight I think we got the most detailed discussion item letter we've had, so that we're making progress on that. But consistently, everyone, developers and applicants have all said that has been a very helpful part of the process. So we'll continue that, and the fee will not be absorbent. But aside from that, we kind of outlined what we thought we accomplished or are moving on in the master plan that we did last year. So some of these, you can't fit, I think, everything into one line item, and some of these are more all-encompassing, but we've taken steps, certainly, in the housing and neighborhood section to start with an inclusive housing policy. Phase 1 of that was adopted by council, so the next step will be engaging with a housing expert to kind of get a better sense for what the market is demanding from that perspective, just like Gibbs did for just overall housing units. So that's just one multi-layered priority for next year.
Reached multifamily housing targets. Nike.
And exceeded, yeah. So
Remember when you asked that question.
So obviously there's a lot of priorities to continue. I just noted a few items where I thought action items to delay on page 5. So at the top of page 5, restoring public alleys should be a longer term action item. So internally we've basically said, unless it's someone asking for a fraction of a alley that should have been vacated the first time, other than that, we've told people flat out, this is where it's not a priority. Look in the master plan. This is where our vision is. Most people understand. So, and then delaying, maybe indefinitely, who knows? Adding lofts as a residential use in the industrial district. I think we all kind of have said we're hitting our housing goals. We don't need to add more there.
Can I ask a quick question? Because I see some things about the sustainability report and maybe sustainability commission. Does that still exist? Incorporated in here. And does just because it kind of came up tonight, do we still have a ADA disability commission that can make recommendations on things?
There's been discussion about bringing it back
Oh, okay. I
for the
thought
last 2 years.
that was a great little nugget tonight about having a commission that we can look to for input and recommendations on the full navigability of our transportation network, including our sidewalks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
But I won't go through every line in here, obviously, but that is sort of where we're at. So if folks have some trainings that they want to include that we can send to the RRC, that'd be great. We'll send out kind of the final version of this before we send it to the RRC, but we're hoping to get this out in the next 2 weeks. And because we're already moving on things in 2018 in those action items, but
So when would you like revisions or additions?
if I could have, today is the 17th, so if I could have everything by the 31st, then we will have it to the RRC the following week is the goal. So
Great. I love seeing this, by the way.
we accomplished a lot.
Yeah.
You think?
More to come.
Did you sleep?
A little bit. So,
Thank you.
yes, yeah.
So one of the other things to kind of accompany this, just as like a outward like transparency piece for us like the general public, is we're also doing like a video to kind of highlight some of the successes we've had with master plan kind of like so we just had a call today to kind of talk through what that looks like. You know, more towards like a social media type thing, but just to show like all the work that
And more of from the tone would be more of, why is this helping a resident or business rather than like a checkbox from staff and the planning commission. So,
Well, and it keeps the master plan alive,
yep,
right?
exactly.
So I like that.
Great.
Cool. I wanted to make sure that we all had clarity around our discussion about M1 and timelines, if you need volunteers now for a steering committee and
Yeah, and what feels like a good overall timeline for the commission would be good. I mean, I know I mentioned end of April would be nice to go forth with the full encompassing vision. That may be aggressive. I'm hopeful that because we've done so much work in the downtown, this can be the next, big project that we have as far as a deep dive. So if 2 or 3 planning commissioners would like to be on the subcommittee, I think that'd be great. Any volunteers would be great. Okay.
my gut tells me that the overlay area
Mhm.
can be tackled faster than anything about the core.
Yeah.
Just because of the real, serious lack of public facilities.
Yeah.
But that overlay district seems reasonable.
And that's what I wanted to ask too. Of those initial options, I mean, were they way off? Were they,
I mean, if you're going to give yourself 3 months to do the thing that will work.
on the right track?
I think they're on the right track. I
Okay.
think it's good to evaluate the different options, but I don't
Okay.
know. And I think they all make sense in their way, but I don't know where I
Yeah.
would come down right now.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and that's okay. Yeah.
And I think just understanding the district better. So I think a tour is a great thing.
Yeah.
And talking to people who live in it and work in it, just having a better idea what it is right now that we're trying to deal with.
Yeah. Makes sense. So, I mean, I think reasonably at the next planning commission meeting, the first one in February, I think we could reasonably have a good discussion, maybe formulate the steering committee with interested property owners and businesses then.
What if we were just to have a sign up at the tour and in outreach with the businesses? I mean, the sign up, you could do it right then.
Yeah.
Just bring it at the first meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly keep everyone in the loop, but it may give you a good cross-section of old and new, heavier manufacturing, more artisan to choose from for a steering committee.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
But then you'd have your list of interested parties.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean the residents across Woodward Heights. I think that was a
opening
good
it up to them,
suggestion.
why not?
Yeah. Okay.
I was thinking with the discussion of the potential for a sliding scale, having a better idea of what the building footprints actually are, or thinking about what the cap on the size of that should be to kind of be accomplishing our goals, or intentions, I should say. Because when I was just looking at 30% or 5,000 square feet, whichever one's greater, that's essentially just saying, there you go, here's
5,000.
here's retail. Everybody's putting in a 5,000 square foot retail in their,
Yeah, and that was kind of
50,
based.
5,500 square foot building or something.
Mhm.
So kind of making sure that that's aligning correctly, both for those largest buildings and the smallest ones, to get that with whatever our actual intentions are.
Mhm.
And I think that would be helpful to know what are the biggest buildings, what are the smallest ones, just so we have our eyes open as
And,
how that would actually be impacting.
and I think also, I mean, for those planning commissioners who may not be able to go on the tour,
Mhm.
maybe on Saturday we take some photos
Yeah.
of some of those largest buildings and some of the smaller buildings, and share that with the rest of the planning commission.
Yeah, it's great.
I think Justin's going to invite the city council as well.
Cool.
Particularly after we realized Dan wasn't going to be here tonight, because if investing in, again, really that inside area is like, 5th or 10th or 82nd on the council's priority of places that they want to invest in the city, that's probably a good thing for us to know. Or something where we can maybe raise a flag and say, hey, this is a really important neighborhood that in terms of what comes to the planning commission, maybe you should move it up your list.
Yeah.
Just because I don't know, what existing overlays do we have in the city?
Just the
UOD.
transit overlay. Yeah.
Okay, and that one is accomplishing, what is that, essentially?
Essentially,
Really brief.
to limit some of the one-story buildings that
Okay.
were being proposed, and trying to limit parking and encourage housing really near transit, the future
Okay.
transit that should be here by now.
Okay. Let's think about that if we're talking about overlays in the industrial districts.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. I want to make sure we talked mechanics a little bit before we all left. So with that, any other items from the commission, staff? We are
Oh,
here.
where are we meeting?
Here. Right?
We'll actually
Saturday?
meet. We can actually. It's probably best if we meet at 2615 Wolcott Urban Rest's parking lot.
Oh, my notes said meet at City Hall.
Yeah, we originally, so we're going to send out an updated itinerary,
Okay.
but I think meeting there, and then so we'll probably generally what we're thinking now is park there. Everything is within 10-minute walk really in that triangles, but we also will likely at the middle of the tour get in a few cars and shoot up Bermuda to take a look at where those Iron Row apartments potentially will be built, and then visit two of the existing tenants in Iron Ridge.
Great.
And then we'll probably finish in that farm field table area or urban rest. But so I mean, and most I will say that a lot of the properties we're going to visit are owned by one person, I would say, and that's just kind of the reality of it. But I have sprinkled in some of the other users as well. So trying to get it. It was tough to get a lot of the legacy, I guess, building owners to come hang out on a tour on Saturday, which, but it doesn't mean we can't inspect their parking areas and the sidewalks there, and I can talk about, some of the, permitted uses that have been going in over the years there too. So,
Great. Should be cool.
and we might get some sunshine on Saturday too. So,
I'm showing up at 10:30, but I'll call you.
okay. So, all right.
Thank you. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
My apologies, I'm being late, everyone. I'm sorry. I
That's all
somehow
right.
it got in my calendar.